Welcome back to the Red Path. Today we're going to take a little bit of a look at the Armour of Contempt. Alright, so it's been about a week now since the Armour of Contempt rule was released for us in the balanced data slate. I've had a few games using it. There's been a lot of people talking about it in the Discord and elsewhere online. It's a very good buff, but before we dive in, I will direct you to a link in the description. Dara actually wrote a pretty in-depth article on it, so I'll post that and you should definitely go check it out, because some of the stuff I'm going to be saying will be kind of doubling down on what he's already written. But I know not everyone prefers written media, so some of you actually prefer the video stuff, so we're going to talk about it here a little bit. But first, let's go ahead and read the actual rule itself, just so we can clarify it for anyone who's maybe been under a rock for a few weeks. So basically the Armour of Contempt, slightly paraphrased, is each time an attack is allocated to a Heretic Astartes, worsen the armour penetration characteristic of that attack by 1. So what that essentially means is every model in your army, if you're running pure Heretic Astartes, that does include Thousand Sons and Death Guard, will ignore the first AP. So if you've got a 3-up armour save and you're taking shots or melee attacks from a -1 weapon, you ignore that -1. If it's coming from a -2, you reduce it by 1. So your 3-up save will be on a 4-up. This does have some really interesting connotations in the game. Recently played Tau just the other day and was in combat, engaged in combat with some crisis suits, and they have a weapon which is -5, or is actually -6, I think, I can't remember exactly. But my Berzerkers had a 6-up armor save because we were in cover, and I got the Armour of Contempt, and I actually made a 6-up save against like this ludicrous weapon. So that actually felt really good, and there's been quite a few examples of that kind of thing paying off. Okay, so the first thing we're going to look at is the benefits, the good side of the Armour of Contempt. So I've got my notes here. So essentially this is something carried over from Dara's article and something that's pretty much obvious to all of us, but this is incredibly powerful on anything that's rocking a 2-up armour save. So your Terminators, Lord Discordants, Leviathan Dreadnoughts, Land Raiders, just being able to retain that 83% probability of making a save on 0 AP and 1 AP weapons is incredibly powerful. It just adds, it's like the total is greater than the sum of the parts. It just buys you that much more time. It buys you so many more opportunities to make saves, because you're essentially getting a 17% buff in most cases. And you know, people that are throwing 0 AP weapons into your T7 and T8 models, that's okay. They will chip through because volume of fire is still the way to get round those in most cases. Or if you're lucky enough to have volume with good AP, if you're rocking more than 4 shots on a model of like a melter equivalent, that will start to put damage through. But it forces your hand, okay? It forces your opponent's hand, is what I mean, into making those tough choices on what they're going to fire on. Now, where you may not necessarily consider putting Melter into regular Berzerkers and maybe focus it on the Rhinos, for instance, now you may actually start considering it, especially if they're in light cover. So they're basically getting a 5-up save into Melter here. There's just so many good plays for this, but the 2-up save seems to be the biggest winner here. And as I said, it also massively buffs the 3-up. My example of having a Berzerker survive a -5 weapon earlier is just a testament to that. Another thing, which is kind of a bit of a side note, but this generally applies to like Demon Engines and some of our, Forge World Dreadnoughts anyway. Anything that's rocking a 3-up, 5-up, so a 3-up armor save and a 5-up invulnerable, would typically be absorbing most of your -1 and -2 firepower. That would be where a canny opponent would be focusing, anything like that, auto cannons and whatever else. but now they may actually have to dedicate more of that kind of las cannon and melter stuff into those to force the invulnerable. And your -3s and -4s aren't as common. -1's pretty standard in most armies, -2's pretty frequent because it's a kind of nice midpoint that can play around in with volume and damage output. But your -3s and -4s typically are single shots or D3 shots or things like that. So that 3-up, 5-up, although it at first glance does feel like it's kind of losing out here, it's now going to be able to be more of a priority for the heavier weapons, which does have an indirect benefit of, you know, making other things like your rhinos or typical land raiders or whatever survive that little bit longer, because the big weapons are going into the things which are essentially a 2-up, 5-up now for all intents and purposes in most situations. Another big thing is a lot of the, you know, large meta armies, your pointy ear elves, your fishy tau, things like that, they do have a preponderance for a lot of volume of -1 and -2 weapons on there. I can't think of the weird names for all their weapons, but I was looking through data sheets on an undisclosed website, and a lot of the kind of weapons that infantry will be carrying around or on their sort of like stock vehicles, you know, sponson gun equivalent, things like that, they do have a lot of volume of -1 and -2, so the ability to just get a straight up 17% buff against those, ignoring the first AP, you know, giving you a 2-up or a 3-up save and cover depending on what models it's shooting into, it plays really well into a lot of the frequent armies that are out there. Also, as I mentioned, it does affect every single model in your army. Cultists do benefit from this. The Lord of Skulls does benefit from this. The Brass Scorpion benefits from this. Demon Princes, absolutely every model in our codex benefits from this. Some benefit far more. Terminators are obviously the biggest winner here. And it does help cultists a little bit. Not too much, but, you know, it does make a difference. Coupled with the debuff to non-line of sight shooting, because typically your cultists will be sitting on an objective somewhere, you know, behind some obscuring or behind true line of sight blocking and just scoring you victory points. Coupled with the additional save they can gain from non-line of sight, it does make them fairly resilient now. And a lot of the time your opponent just doesn't want to dedicate anything into them. And probably the last thing I want to talk about in the benefit section here is weapons we are already kind of, or a lot of the weapons, ranged wise at least, that we're already locked into, just you know, as virtue of having an older codex, didn't get hurt by this. Bolters, fine. They, you know, arguably they're a bit better now, just because if your opponent is heavily teching into going against -1 and -2, you don't care about it. Same for Volkite. Volkite's seen actually quite a significant glow up because of this. It's got the volume, it does the mortal wounds. It was already okay for World Eaters, you know, with the access to Khorne to give rerolls for the Contemptors and stuff. So our ranged options didn't really get hurt. Now, if you were running a lot of heavy bolters or autocannons, things like that, maybe, but they're still going to be as good as they were into other things, and whatever was running them, whether it's Havocs or a Rapier Battery or something like that, it's got a bit tankier on the flip side, right? So now I want to talk about the downsides a little bit. This isn't like doom and gloom, but we have to remain realistic and look at this from both sides. So contrary to the last point I just made about our frequent weapons not really being hurt, the fact is we do have like old weapon options. We are stuck with very standard weapon profiles, bolters, autocannons, the Reaper chain cannon, things like that. And especially in World Eaters, there's no real way to buff these beyond some rerolls, Vets of the Long War. There's not much else we can do. We can't help with psychic shenanigans. We don't get like the Tallyman or anything like that to kind of elevate and amplify these weapons. So lacking the variety and versatility of, say, the Death Guard or Thousand Suns with their Inferno Bolters, which are -2 natively, I believe, we don't have the ability so much to branch out and really diversify our ranged firepower that other legions or other armies may do just because we don't have access. We are stuck to like the 4 core weapon types, really, aren't we? So there's not much we can do about that, but it is countered by the fact that bolters and volkite are still really good, and I'm sure a few other weapons kind of fall into that niche as well. A negative point that's specific almost to World Eaters, I mean it does apply to Chaos Space Marines, but it's something we are very reliant on, is obviously in combat, because the Armour of Contempt applies there as well. We are very reliant on -1, our chainswords and chain axes, which are, generally our go-to weapons on our Berzerkers. We throw chainswords. If something can take a chain weapon, typically we're putting it on there just for the rule of cool, if nothing else. But it does hurt that, because going into Marines, going to anything with the Armour of Contempt, it was already a struggle. You would be stacking your Wild Fury and Vets of the Long War on your Berzerker squad to kind of push through the 5 Grey Knight Interloper Paladin Sorcerer, whatever they're called, people. Now you spend Wild Fury just to put them on a 4-up save in most cases, which is still good and probably something you're going to want to be doing. But it does, in a way, want you to really focus on staggering your attacks now, because you are only going to be able to realistically buff 1 charged unit, and going into Marines, most anything you're fighting will be able to hit you back. Not as strongly as before, of course, because we also benefit from the armour, but unless you're charging, say, a unit of Vanguard veterans and a Gladius tank or something, you're not too worried about the Gladius, because you're probably not going to kill it in combat anyway, so you focus on the Vanguard vets there, and then depending on what their situation is like, if they've got storm shields and stuff. But it does make it a little bit more difficult, because we did take a slight debuff in some matchups. And finally, some of the biggest winners from this, like Thousand Sons and Death Guard, benefit terrifically. Scarab Occults are just obscene, in my opinion. There was just an article posted, the Reddit Meta Monday, didn't really have much information, and it's you can't judge a new rule by 1 week, maybe 10 days of tournament action. So I'm not looking at it as a realistic guideline, but there wasn't much change there for Chaos factions. I do think it will see a significant change over the next few weeks and couple of months, depending on what knights do to the meta and things like that. But I do think Thousand Sons, especially Death Guard to a slightly lesser extent, but still a big winner. And then within Chaos Space Marines, Alpha Legion definitely look very good. Everyone benefits very well, but I think anyone who's multi-layering defensive strats is doing well. World Eaters are not on there. I think we benefited the least, probably, out of all the legions, just because of our typical playstyle and the fact that almost everything we've got is focused on combat. And as mentioned, not much access to volume of combat beyond -2 on 1 unit. So we won, but we won the least, I think, is the talking point there. Now, that's the good and the bad. I want to talk about a couple of kind of tech ideas I've come up with, or I don't know if I come up with them. They're not like original thoughts here, but I've been thinking about ways that this plays into the way I play the game. And the first thing I want to talk about is the fact that now, because we will be bouncing a little harder against Marines, we maybe won't be wiping a full squad, but leaving 1 or 2 models there. There's definitely an argument to be made now for focusing and attempting to underkill units. This is something I wrote an article back before the Red Path on. Underkill is essentially you do the quick math hammer in your head on a target, and you dedicate enough Berzerkers or whatever unit you're charging in to not fully kill the unit, so you can use the movement jank, the additional pile-ins and consolidates, to wrap and tag them, right? So either fully preventing them from falling back if they don't have the CP to desperate breakout, or if they're taking Oath of Moment, as they probably are as a loyalist Space Marine, they don't want to fall back at all, right? So it's a little bit of tech. If you try point a model, you put your opponent in a position where they can attempt a desperate fallback and give up some VP, especially if they're taking over the moment, which they probably are, like I said. And you can play cut them down on them and stuff like that. But that unit is most likely not going to be able to do anything that turn. If they're White Scars, I believe, can fall back and charge, and I'm sure there's stratagems in there in the book to allow shooting after falling back and things like that. But these probably cost them resources. So because you're probably not going to kill a unit now, if you're just running 5 Berzerkers and it's say 5 Intercessors just as a token, I don't know if you necessarily kill them. You might do if you spike, but I think mathematically you maybe don't anymore. So you would actually aim to completely encircle them, at least encircle one model that isn't pulled, so they have a difficult choice on their turn, because if they don't fall back, you'll be fighting first, most likely, and in addition, you won't be able to be shot at because you'll be within engagement range. So it's just a little bit of a tactical nuance you can build into your play style to make the most of this, making the best out of a bad situation in that specific situation, I guess. The second little thing I want to talk about is the Power Fist. So Power Fist has kind of generally fallen off for World Eaters players. It was very, very staple in 8th edition. Everyone was running Power Fist on their champions. And then, especially with the buffs to the Lightning Claw, the updated wording on it, the fact that 2 gives you 2 additional attacks, things like that. The Lightning Claw has just become par for the course, for the most part. I know there are still some legends running Power Fists on their champions or other options, and there are arguments to be made for running Power Axes and Power Swords and things like that. I think anything which is boosting your AP is very good, but I think, in my opinion, at the moment, in the current state of the matter, the Power Fist is actually not too bad at all. It's certainly better than it was, because it's got -3 AP, so you're still forcing 5 up save on a regular Marine, and you can force the 6 up if you put Wild Fury on the unit anyway, which you're probably doing. So it's very good. It's stripping away a considerable amount of their armor. It's 2 damage, which, okay, into Death Guard and into Dreadnoughts, that's bad, but you don't play Death Guard and Dreadnoughts every game. And if you are playing them, so what? Okay, it's a thing. Lightning Claws have always been bad, or were bad, into Custodies, and are now going to be really bad into Salamanders. Anything that can switch off your rerolls, you don't want to be relying on rerolls. But you're not going to play Salamanders every game. You're not going to play Death Guard every game. So looking at that, and I can hear you saying, yeah, but it's -1 to hit. Okay, but I'll tell you what else is pretty prevalent in the meta right now, is being -1 to hit in combat. Drakari can do it with their, or all the Eldar can do it with their lightning fast reflexes, and they typically will, especially if you're going into a good juicy target. There's several other armies which can make you -1, like a Death Guard have certain models. I think the Mephitic Blight Hauler makes you -1 in combat. It's a pretty prevalent rule. Any army that has any kind of combat focus, so basically anything other than Tau, has probably got access to be a -1 in combat through a stratagem or a warlord trait or something like that. So if you're already -1, it doesn't stack. So admittedly, all your chain axes and chain swords will become -1, and you'll lose Death to the False Emperor and things like that, which will suck. But your Power Fist won't actually negatively matter. It won't matter about that. The only weird instance where it would matter is if it was against Imperium, I guess, and you wanted to stoke the nails to Death to the False Emperor on 5s, and they made you an additional -1. Pretty sure the math would mean that it doesn't kick off. Or if you set to defend and you wanted to Death to the False Emperor. There's things that it would jank around, but these are going to be very edge cases. So I think the Power Fist is back. The 2 damage is nice, because into everyone who isn't -1 damage, that's popping a normal Marine. You won't get as many hits through as you would with an axe, but you need 2 unsaved axe strikes to equal an unsaved fist strike on a 2-wound Marine. And you're far more likely to kill Marines with each fist strike than you are with axe strikes. you kind of got to think about it a bit. And it's also just generally good into your average vehicle and stuff like that. So I do think Power Fists, although maybe still slightly a bit too expensive, are back on the table. So wrapping it up, we do have some very clear winners here. Terminators, obviously. Being infantry, so you know they're able to be apoplectic frenzied, they can make use of breachable, they have a 2-up and a 5-up invuln, so they're essentially getting against anything with AP a 0-up save, becoming a 2-up because 1s always fail whilst they're in light cover. Red Butchers, especially for World Eaters, are just incredible right now. I think we can be a little bit more aggressive with them. A couple times I've used them with Armour of Contempt. I've maybe been a bit too conservative, just can't quite get it into my head, because sitting them on cover rather than behind it, which is what I've been doing, I've been aiming to benefit from obscuring rather than going in and getting the 1-up save and absorbing some fire, which I think is probably generally going to be the play if your opponent looks to really only be bringing AP 0, AP 1 or 2 into those Terminators, because they will tank an awful lot of shots. So yeah, anything with a 2-up save, you know, Leviathans as well are incredibly good right now because they have multiple ways of negatively affecting your opponent's damage output. The Disco Lord is also really good, being toughness 6, having a 2-up save. It does have a 5-up armor as well. It has 2 innate healing abilities with the when it kills vehicles in combat, and then it has Infernal Regeneration. You could give it Blood Hunger, so it would, let me just check the rule. So Blood Hunger, if it kills a model in melee on a 4-up, it regains a wound, and then you could also give it True Berserker as a Warlord trait, which would would halve income damage, but rounding up. So a damage 2-shot would be a damage 1-shot. I believe that's only in combat though, but it's still very good. We've had some discussions on putting this on a Red Butcher Lord as well, with the Berzerker Glaive to give a 2-up, 4-up, 5-up, halving incoming damage in combat. There's some really tanky builds that can be made, especially on the Terminator Lord, I think. And finally, the Benediction of Darkness. This was, Darren and I talked about this in the live stream we did. Benediction of Darkness is now, I think, an auto take, at least for right now. We'll see how it plays out. Obviously we need a lot more people playing a lot more games with it, but I think the Terminator brick, with all and every possible buff you can give it, there was some discussion about Fabius Bile giving them a toughness 5. I don't know if that's necessarily the play anymore. I personally don't think it's efficient, but there's some people that do, and it can definitely work. I mean, toughness 5 Terminators with -1 to hit, Armour of Contempt in cover is obnoxious. It's starting to push towards being Scarab Occult Terminator good. Not quite, but for the points, it's very good. But for me, no. I think the Benediction of Darkness and being able to be in cover with an Apoplectic Frenzy is probably enough to just absorb a lot of firepower and force your opponent to come out. You may be sacrificing those Terminators, but it does mean that the remainder of your army is going to be there to counterpunch whatever made itself vulnerable by coming out to play. So, alright, that kind of sums up my thoughts on Armour of Contempt. Let me know in the comments how your games have been going with it, what kind of tech and what ideas I may have missed out talking about. Is there ideas that, you know, we should be messing around with, should be experimenting with? Yeah, just let us know. Please consider coming and joining our Discord. There's a link below, of course. Make sure you check out Dara's article. Again, the link will be in the description. And yeah, that about wraps it up for today. So until next time, stay healthy, stay safe, and kill main burn.